Hello and good evening. My name is Michaela Lundberg and my speech is on human communication. Let's take a look at this first slide. Paul J. Meyer, a philanthropist and author, once said, "Communication, the human connection, is the key to personal and career success." Alder, Rodman, and Dupree also said in their Essential Communication book, "We define communication as the process of creating meaning through symbolic interaction." Communication is not just verbal, it also includes nonverbal communication. But let's start with verbal communication. There are 6 examples of verbal communication. This includes intrapersonal, interpersonal, small group communication, organizational group communication, public communication, and mass communication. This goes all the way from having those conversations within ourselves, deciding who we are, and all the way to the world, which would be our social media platform. Now let's head over to the other side of the spectrum, which is nonverbal communication. And there are many different types of nonverbal communication, including posture, fidgeting, smiling, eye contact, expression of emotion, voice, touch, and attractiveness. And these can cause people to make assumptions and decide how they feel about you before they've even met or heard your voice. Talking about what exactly communication is only one part of a huge puzzle. Human communication is a process and has different models that can explain it. Human communication also has communicative disorders that interfere with our ability to communicate. Human communication requires communication skills that develop over time to help us better communicate with one another. Even though it's important to understand what exactly communication is and the different types of it, it's important to know the processes and models to help us gather a deeper understanding of it. Human communication is a process. There are 2 types of models that can explain it: Harold Laswell's model and a transactional model. Professor Candace Thomas Maddox, in her 2019 communication article, wrote, Harold Laswell, 1948, created one of the earliest models to depict variables in the communication process. And on the right side, you will see the transactional model that I will talk about in a minute. First, let's start with Harold Laswell's. This simplistic form is source, message, channel, receiver, and effect. In a more defined term, that would mean who says what, channel to whom, and with what effect. So it's kind of a feedback thing, and it's just you and that person. The aim of Laswell's communication model was to analyze mass communication and use to explain interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication is a conversation between just 2 people. A model that can explain Harold Laswell's communication process is a linear communication model. An easier way to understand what exactly linear communication model means is like tossing a ball back and forth. A sender encodes their thoughts, feelings, and ideas into a message, and then the receiver conveys and decodes what the person has told them. So they decide what they say back. This process is that each person takes turn being a sender and a receiver. But there's another model that can explain communication in a better way, which is a transactional model. In transactional communication models means that people send and receive messages simultaneously. Professor Candace Thomas Maddox also wrote in her 2019 communication article, the distinction between source and receiver is blurred in these models, as the source and receiver provide simultaneous feedback to each other and through the use of verbal and nonverbal communication, which means there can be noise everywhere around us. We are hearing that, and that's communication, is paying attention to anything and everything. But there's still that main conversation. But let's turn from processes and models to communicative disorders. Human communication has many communicative disorders. Author Ray Kent, in his 2010 communication disorder article, describes communication disorders as limit or disrupt any of the processes human communication, including language, voice, speech, and hearing. But the world of communication disorders isn't simple, cut and dry. They can correlate with psychiatric disorders as well, or even be caused by psychiatric disorders. Examples of communicative disorders are fluency, voice, language, articulation, and hearing disorders. But examples of psychiatric disorders are schizophrenia, alexithymia, aphasia, and dementia. Let's go a little more into detail about communicative disorders first. Fluency disorders is a deficiency in keeping your flow of speech intact, like stuttering. Voice disorders is a problem due to your vocal mechanism, spasms in your voice box and larynx. Language disorders are atypically grammatically commonly found in children. This can be a deficiency in spoken, written, and sign language, or ASL. Articulation disorders is a pronunciation problem caused by a cleft palate. This includes slurring of words and indirect speech. Lastly is hearing disorders. Hearing disorders are hearing loss, which is due to either age or nerve damage from injury or accident. These deficiencies are considered communicative disorders because they affect the way we communicate with one another. But these are only common ones. There are many, many more. Now let's move on to psychiatric disorders. Psychiatric disorders are known to affect at least 1/3 of our population. A psychiatric disorder is referred to as patterns of behavioral or psychological symptoms that stress an individual's ability to complete common activities or communicate. Schizophrenia is when a person is considered to lose contact with reality and not function the way others tend to. Their mind's in another world, but their body's still here. Alexithymia is a disorder that causes a person to not have control over their own emotions. Internally, they can feel happy, but externally, they're showing that they're sad. Ray Kent also said in his 2010 communication disorder article, the most common acquired language disorder in adults is aphasia, which results from damage to the brain that disrupts one or more processes of language, formulation, expression, and reception. Dementia is not necessarily a disease. It's a group of dysfunctions in one's bodies. This includes continual memory loss and other brain damage. But now let's move from our communicative disorders over to communication skills. Human communication requires communication skills that develop over time to help us better communicate with one another. Communication skills and training have been being implemented and developed for the past 60 years in colleges and professions everywhere. The first 5 years of your life and my life are when you have the most communication skills developed. Children develop referential language at young age, starting with one-word sentences, then slowly adding on more words as time progresses, like truck, and then on to one truck, and then one truck falls. Once we've reached adulthood and finding our careers, we tend to see colleges implement communication skills as a part of their criteria. This helps us have great personal and professional relationships that'll last. Like seen in healthcare, it is a patient and doctor relationship. Author Angela Harmon, in her 2016 Communication Skills Development article, wrote, there are specific developmental milestones for communication during the first 5 years of our life. In 0 to 12 months, we start out by turning our heads towards sound and differentiating whether emotions and gender. So if they're mad, they're sad, they're happy, and then whether or not they're male or female. By 12 months, or a year old, we have started using words like hi, bye, and up. In 12 to 24 months, we understand prepositions, simple phrases, and responding correctly to when and where. By 2 years of age, we have 20 to 50 words in our vocabulary. In 24 to 36 months, we can identify objects and pictures, understand negative words, and respond to simple directions. Then we can finally say our own names. In 36 to 48 months, we begin to understand the concepts of time, understand comparisons, and begin using sentences with some phonetical errors still. In 48 to 60 months, we have more than 200 words in our vocabulary, completing commands in order and asking questions. Lastly, in the 60 to 70 months, we can identify rhyming words and can hold a conversation with people, but there are differences between adult and child grammar. Now let's move on to communication skills training that is a huge part of our adulthood and careers. Communication skills training is extensive in a profession including, but not limited to, physicians, dentists, nurses, and pharmacists. Author David Evan wrote in his 2010 Communication Skills Training article, there are several meta-analytical studies showing that the impact of training with these healthcare professional groups is positive, enhancing professional patient communication and patient satisfaction. As we reach adulthood, many people find themselves lacking interpersonal communication skills. They feel they can't talk to one another, that they can't express their emotions. This is most seen in those with psychiatric disorders, child management problems, drinking problems, and marital issues. The type of communication skills that people need to have is the ability to communicate about a common problem that they're having, and conversational skills, so they can hold conversations with one another. Conversation skills are ones that we use now, but they get harder to use as we get older. We don't know everything they know or do what they do, as you must find common ground. Now, let's just summarize what we've learned. There are many parts to human communication, and it isn't easy as it seems. But there's different types of communication models and processes, communicative disorders that are sometimes overlooked, and implementing of communication skills in everything. As time continues to progress, the additions to communications have greatly increased the way we choose to communicate today. I do hope that as time continues, we work on seeing each other's differences and lives as great things instead of what we have chosen now.